Hello, welcome to Oh God, What Now, the podcast that has now outlasted 4 Prime Ministers and 1 Archbishop of Canterbury. I'm Dorian Lynskey. On today's show, Donald Trump has begun appointing his minions to cabinet posts. Who's made the cut, and realistically, what can they get done? Andy Kroll is an investigative reporter for ProPublica and joins the panel to get into it all. Plus, back home, Kemi Badenoch has selected her shadowy cabinet. What can we expect from the newly refurbished opposition? And in the extra bit for supporters, Donald Trump's victory was a giant body blow to his opponents, including us. After the initial shock and despair, how are we managing? Let's meet today's panel. First, Westminster editor for The Lead, Zoe Grünewald. Hi, Zoe.
Hello.
So migration from Twitter to Blue Sky, which people have been talking about for ages, seems to have reached a tipping point since the election. Follow accounts booming. Just the other day, it was America's most popular app. Meanwhile, Twitter deactivations have tripled within a week, and The Guardian just quit posting altogether. With Elon Musk becoming Trump's right-hand man, could this finally be the end of Twitter's dominance of the discourse?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I went to bed last night with 7,000 followers on Blue Sky, and I woke up with 11,000 this morning, which was extraordinary to me because that's more than I ever had on X. So clearly there is this mass.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
it's more.
Clearly there is this mass of people moving over to Blue Sky. And I think that is in part due to some of the functionalities of Blue Sky. There is this thing called lists where you can just, say that again. There's this thing called starter packs where you can just go and click, someone's made them, they've added all their favourite politicos in, and you can just click follow and automatically it populates for you. And I think that was part of what put people off moving away from X, because they felt like they'd curated their following list over many, many years, and to start again felt very kind of daunting. So I think in some ways Blue Sky has managed to overcome some of those barriers. But I think definitely particularly the way that Donald Trump and Elon Musk have been cozying up to each other, the fact that he's put Elon Musk in charge of this brief about government efficiency, it now very much feels like X is not only going to become this kind of, or has become this place where right-wing free speech in inverted commas runs riot. It actually might be a mouthpiece for Trump and indeed a kind of propaganda outlet. So I think a lot of people feel like they don't really want to stay there if that's what it's going to become. They don't want to be a part of it. What I do find quite funny is it almost feels like a lot of the kind of liberals have moved over to Blue Sky and left quite a lot of the right on X. And it's like, that the Liberals' platform's called Blue Sky, and then the Right's platform is called X, and it's kind of like that "Are we the baddies" meme. It's like, yeah, maybe you are.
I don't mind the echo chamber criticisms because basically for one thing, people on the left are always arguing with each other, so you can still get argument. And for another thing, there was no sort of healthy debate with blue tick troll. Like, it just was not happening. So
no, I mean, I will, I'll just be trying to do my job, posting about something on Twitter or X, and the replies are so obscene sometimes. It's like, why would I stay here? I don't have to be.
Well, you had a viral tweet recently, which has now become like a witch's curse. Just like it's just going to ruin your day or week. Next up, it's columnist and author of A History of the World in 47 Borders, Jonn Elledge.
Hello. I've also got 5,000 new followers. It's very exciting.
Congratulations.
Just wanted to get that in there.
Well done, John. Kim Leadbeater's Assisted Dying Bill has been published, and opposition is growing, led by Health Secretary Wes Streeting. And now there are predictions that what seemed like a fairly popular policy will actually be voted down. Why has the tide turned?
I think they're rushing it. My instincts are all on the side of supporting assisted dying. I think, medicine has improved to the point we can keep people alive, but we can't necessarily give them a good life. It just feels like more and more people are going to get to the point with very serious conditions they just don't want to live with anymore. So I've always instinctively thought at some point we're going to have this debate, but it is a bit scary, some of the stuff coming out of places like Canada that have gone ahead of us. And it just feels like, the classic example of the sort of debate where you actually do need to sort of stop and think about it properly and not just kind of make a rushed decision for political reasons. So, and if they try and push this through without adequate consideration, I think a lot of people quite rightly will think, well, it's a free vote. I do not necessarily want my name on something that could plausibly go horribly wrong. Best stay on the side of safety.
Streeting claims recently it would drain money from the NHS budget, even though Leadbeater says that only a few hundred people a year would use it, which sort of seems to make sense. I wonder, is Streeting padding out his obvious moral objections with dubious justifications and sort of leaning on his authority as health secretary? This smelt off to me.
Maybe. I think it's the nature of sort of a free vote like this. You can't check the contents of someone's soul, can you? I do think there are practical concerns I've not really seen addressed. Like at the moment, we don't have a functional social care system. If you don't fix that, it does kind of feel like it might be too easy to get people sort of starting to think that they don't want to be a burden or something. So I think if they are moral concerns, I don't really have a problem with that. I do also think I think Leadbeater went on the radio and said that Britain has the best palliative care system in the world, which nobody I know in the NHS would agree with. As I say, I instinctively want to support this measure, but I just don't understand why we're doing it on such a hurried timetable. Why is this not something like there are some things government does where you think you can do that quicker, building stuff. We should be able to build stuff with far fewer consultations. This does feel like the kind of thing where you actually should spend some time having a proper public debate about it, rather than just trying to do it on a particular timetable for political reasons.
Finally, our guest this week is an award-winning investigative reporter for ProPublica and author of A Death on W Street, The Murder of Seth Rich and the Age of Conspiracy. Andy Kroll. Andy, welcome.
Great to be here.
Fortunately, we don't have to talk about right-wing conspiracy theories anymore. They've all gone away.
Ancient history.
But here's one from the left. Some Democrats on social media have been alleging that the election was rigged, possibly using Elon Musk's Starlink technology. After all of Trump's election theories since 2020, shouldn't his opponents be better than this? Is this not the last thing that Democrats should be doing?
It is the last thing Democrats should be doing, and I'd be lying if I didn't say my heart has sunk a little bit to see people who spent the last 4 years pointing out, criticizing, ridiculing election deniers on the right now spouting off on X or Blue Sky, also just sending me countless emails and tips about, disappearing ballots or Starlink somehow interfering with the election. Again, no evidence for any of this stuff. Some of it is also just so nonsensical. It's just so simply dumb because the votes are still being counted in places like California, Washington State, Oregon on the West Coast here. We just haven't counted all the ballots yet. And so people are like, where are the missing ballots? Elon Musk stole the ballots. And it's like, no, they're literally still being counted, guys. This is how it works every 4 years. Obviously, this is an outpouring of anger, disappointment, despair in some quarters. But the fact that it's being channeled into really the same kind of stuff that we heard in 2020 at the end of the year, 2021, and frankly, all the way through till Donald Trump's election last week is disheartening. Have we learned nothing? Have we not ingrained some of the lessons of the election denial last time? And the deniers on the right, too, are now pointing to the ones on the left and saying, they're with us now. See, now we have momentum. And that, too, is a bit of discouraging phenomenon. Hopefully it dies down in the next couple of weeks when reality sets in and the votes get counted. But yeah, things are not well on the left side of the political spectrum right now.
Are there some Trump supporters who are so committed to the bit that even though he won, they're still insisting that the election was somehow kind of meddled with and that he should have won by more? I'm just wondering, because obviously he went very quiet about this, but are there the hardcore that still need to believe?
Yeah, there are the hardcore. And yes, you're right. Donald Trump has gone completely silent on this. I mean, he was posting on Truth Social the day of the election, or a day or two before, massive cheating in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia specifically. I think he said, not hearing anything about that now. Magically, that issue has gone away. It doesn't matter. But yeah, there are still some folks. We're seeing a bit of it out of the state of Arizona, where Democrat Ruben Gallego beat Carrie Lake, who was kind of the queen of election denial. If Donald Trump was the king, she was the Republican running for U.S. Senate. So some people have glommed onto her second defeat in a row and said that there were shenanigans there. But really, it's the sort of hardcore MAGA people who are pointing to the folks on the far left and saying, look, they've finally clued in to the story of the missing ballots. I think even Tucker Carlson has posted, whatever we call it now, about this thing. So, the horseshoe theory of politics never ceases to amaze me.
Well, in the extra bit, we'll be talking about some healthier routes for one's angst. Before we get started, don't forget the Oh God What Now Christmas live show. It's always a brilliant night where we get together with you, our beloved listeners, to look back on the political year. And what a political year it's been. A lot of it naughty, some of it nice. It's happening at the Comedy Store in London on Tuesday, 10th of December, and I'll be hosting along with my Christmas helpers John Elledge and Marie Leconte. And we have a very special guest, The Guardian's parliamentary sketch writer, Jonn, friend of the pod and a very funny man. We're really looking forward to it, so please join us for a night of combined therapy and celebration. There's a link to tickets at the top of the show notes. And Patreon people, remember you get a discount. We'll send a reminder of the code out. So get your tickets, wrap up warm. We'll see you there.
I'm going to be dressed as an elf.
John will be dressed as an elf. But you should come anyway. Let's begin. Donald Trump has begun appointing his administration. You don't have to be a billionaire or a Fox News host to work here, but it helps. Who is he recruiting, and will they be able to carry out the boss's freewheeling campaign promises? Andy Kroll is the man to ask. Andy, a lot to get into. You've been following Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation's blueprint for the second Trump administration. And it was so shocking that it became part of the Harris-Walz campaign, and also Trump was forced to deny having anything to do with it, a little unconvincingly. Can you remind us what it is and who put it together?
Project 2025 was this massive coalition effort that brought together think tanks and activists, former Trump administration officials from 1.0, who did a couple of things to try to lay the groundwork for a future Trump administration. So what they did was they put together this massive 884-page policy blueprint, a huge book called Mandate for Leadership that the Heritage Foundation published, and basically took all of the minds of people who worked for Trump before, people in the conservative MAGA universe, and they laid out, this is what you should do on policy. And there are a lot of very extreme things in there, rolling back policies on climate change, rolling back access to abortion medication, redefining what an American family is. It should be a man and a woman with children, a whole bunch of kind of retrograde, pretty extreme conservative policies. So there's that piece. There's this big blueprint document. And then there's this whole separate part of Project 2025 where they were reaching out to people, recruiting, vetting, and then training, in theory, thousands of different people to work in a Trump administration if Trump won. So it's not just, okay, what are the policies, but who are the people who are going to implement it? And, that gets to this idea that you hear a lot in American politics, that personnel is policy. Who you hire is as much as the policies you have written down that you try to implement. Project 2025, as you rightly pointed out, proved to be politically toxic for Donald Trump. His campaign repeatedly said that there was no connection, even though the majority of the people who worked on Project 2025 were related to Trump in some way, worked for his campaign in 2016, worked for his government the first time around, et cetera. Trump himself, I have nothing to do with this. His campaign manager, I think, said something like, if the rumors of Project 2025's untimely death are true, that's great. I mean, they basically made clear how much they disliked this effort, even though it was produced by a bunch of their allies. So the big question now is any of that rhetoric, was any of that rhetoric at the time true? Are they really going to maintain this distance with the policies of Project 2025? Are the incoming Trump officials really going to blacklist people who worked on Project 2025, as has been reported during the campaign season? The early signs are no. So Tom Homan, who was the sort of immigration leader, policy guru during Trump 1.0, has already been named the border czar. He contributed to Project 2025. Stephen Miller, someone who probably needs no introduction, has just been named the deputy chief of staff for policy. Sounds like he's just going to be the policy czar, period. Also very involved in Project 2025 until it became unpopular. And then he said, oh, no, nothing to do with it. So far, the indications are all of that tough campaign talk about how bad Project 2025 was and how it had nothing to do with Trump were really just talk. And the two parties seem to be moving closer again.
Now, cabinet appointments have to be confirmed by the Senate. The Republicans in charge now, all the sort of dissenters seem to have gone. So is there any chance that he won't get everyone he wants? Like, should we take it in the news if they go, oh, he's putting forward candidate X? Is there any reason to think that that person will not get the job?
I don't think that these appointees are all no-brainers. I don't think that the path to confirmation for them is totally assured in every case. I say that for a few reasons. I mean, one, the Republicans, they just need a basic majority to confirm these people, and they're going to have that number. They'll have whatever it is, 53 or so. But just today, on the day we're talking, Wednesday, the Senate is meeting. Senate Republicans are meeting to elect their new leader, the person who's going to replace Mitch McConnell. And there are a few people in contention there who are not total Trump ditto heads. John Cornyn of Texas, John Thune of South Dakota, I believe it is, one of those Dakotas. These are not total Trump loyalists. I mean, Cornyn for sure isn't. And we may get into a situation where one or two of these sort of Trump would-be appointments goes up for a battle, and that there are maybe one or two moderate Republican senators who say, and there are a few of those left, who say, we don't want to support Pete Hegseth, who was just named to be the defense secretary, someone who, is a veteran, but mostly a Fox News talking head. He has no experience running an organization, period, let alone one with 3 million employees. So maybe they, pick a fight there. There are other, if Betsy DeVos gets brought back to run the Department of Education with the mandate to close it permanently, that would obviously have a big effect on how public education works here. And, Democrats with maybe a few moderate Republicans may pick a fight on that as well. Trump does have a lot of momentum. He does, in the eyes of his supporters in Congress, have something of a mandate. But I don't think that all of these picks are a total lock, just because some of them really represent some extreme positions, some extreme policies.
Do you think that RFK, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who we know is very vocally anti-vax, will really be given control over the nation's health?
Formally, probably not. It's hard to see, going back to this question of appointments, how he would ever get through the appointment process. I mean, you just have to look at the data about, the history of public health and the implementation of vaccines. And I'm not talking COVID vaccines. I'm talking like basic, proven health vaccines, to see the night and day effect there. And to have someone who would be HHS, Health and Human Services Secretary, or head of the CDC, be someone who does not support sort of, tried and true vaccinations. I don't think there are 50 votes with a tiebreaker from the vice president for that. However, what I am hearing is that he is playing a not insignificant behind the scenes role recruiting people to serve in the Trump administration, people who he will have vetted, people that he knows, people in his kind of quack health networks, to work inside places like Health and Human Services or the CDC. So that is obviously, alarming in its own right, but it's not the same as running the agency. It's really hard to imagine how, given the totally anti-science positions he's taken on a lot of key issues, how he'd ever make it through confirmation. But he can still wield power behind the scenes. He has this Make MAGA, Make America Healthy Again healthy being sort of questionably defined there. And he seems to be soliciting names. And we know he has a direct line to President-elect Trump, just taking some getting used to saying again. So he's there. He's in the mix, but he's just not necessarily someone who, I think is going to wield power in like a legal, formal way as like a cabinet secretary.
Because there's another weird grey area with Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy with their new cost-cutting Department of Government Efficiency, which Trump compares to the Manhattan Project. Presumably it will kill a lot of people and haunt its leaders to the grave. But it won't actually be part of the government. So is this kind of does anyone understand how this will work? Like he's bringing people in, but he's not putting them through that confirmation process. They're not becoming federal employees. They're just sort of hanging around.
Yes. And, for our very online listeners out there, the acronym of DOGE, Doge, for this new whatever it is, I just had to point out for whatever that's worth. It's completely unclear how this would work for the reasons you've pointed out and for other reasons as well. I mean, for one, Trump's announcement described it as the Department of Government Efficiency. Well, that would suggest it's like a cabinet secretary position, like the Department of Energy or the Department of State. But presumably he's not calling on, he's not planning to create an entirely new government agency to get rid of government agencies or make government more efficient. So if it's not that, is it some kind of blue ribbon commission, a task force? Is it something just like totally, informal on paper where Elon will just kind of run from agency to agency and try to make people do things he doesn't have the authority to do? All of this is unclear at the moment. And, another big part of this is the conflicts of interest at stake here. I mean, Elon Musk, someone who has, billions of dollars in government contracts through his various companies, in a position to pick and choose which government programs and employees should stay and which should go. If Elon Musk says it would be more efficient to make NASA no longer exist and replace it with SpaceX, which, in a sort of more incremental way is something we have actually heard substantively, that does not seem like a workable solution here. I mean, right now, this thing exists on paper, and that's basically it. And, it's hard to see it becoming anything more than just a kind of pet project, toothless task force that, Vivek and Elon can sort of make some noise. But it's hard to see how they'll have any actual authority to do anything apart from making recommendations, which, go ahead and make recommendations.
I mean, Musk seems to have made himself into Trump's sidekick incredibly quickly, but he doesn't have a small ego, and Donald Trump does have a record of like falling out with people at random. Do you see this kind of bromance between them actually lasting any length of time?
It lasts as long as Donald Trump feels like it's serving his purposes. And then from the moment that Trump feels like it doesn't, Musk will be gone. We know that because that's the story of Donald Trump long before he ever got into politics, but certainly since he's gotten into politics. The benefits that Musk brought to Trump during the campaign were obvious, glaring, there for anyone to see. Certainly anyone who was on X and following both what Elon Musk was saying and the way that that platform was being reoriented to essentially help elect Donald Trump. I mean, Musk poured more than $100 million into the ground game for Donald Trump, gave more money to other super PACs, used X to basically be a kind of MAGA mouthpiece for Trump. All of that stuff was beneficial to Trump. But now we're at the point where presumably Elon Musk wants some return on his investment. He wants more government contracts, or he wants SpaceX more ingrained at NASA if NASA continues to exist. And, that kind of stuff is going to come with blowback. There will be, public outcries if Musk tries to take advantage of his position, his relationship with Trump. I think that the potential for scandals and corruption and self-dealing is just off the charts in a way that wasn't even the case with Trump 1.0, and there was a lot of corruption and a lot of shady stuff going on then too. And if that starts to overshadow Trump himself, Musk will go. That's just the way that Donald Trump works. The question is, how long does that take? How, can Musk sort of tiptoe around in the background and find ways to, boost his companies without pissing off his new super buddy, his super best buddy, some nickname. So to me, it's a matter of time before that relationship frays or explodes.
Is anyone around Trump so far not as terrible as we maybe expected them to be?
Good question. I mean, I would not underestimate his chief of staff, Susie Wiles. She was his basically top campaign advisor. A lot of people give her credit for keeping that campaign from flying off the rails many times, even though it may not look like that from the outside. I think the turmoil, the infighting, backstabbing that you would hear about happening behind the scenes, as is always the case in Trump organizations, she played a pretty big role in preventing that from imploding the campaign. So she is a real operative. Whether she can withstand the pressure and the chaos of a Trump White House, we'll see. Obviously, most of the chiefs in the first Trump administration couldn't, because there were 4 or 5 of them, however many it was. She's legit though. It'll be interesting to see some of these other cabinet picks, like Marco Rubio, senator from Florida. He's going to the State Department. He's obviously got his checkered past with Trump, ran against him. Trump ridiculed him. Little Marco, who could forget that nickname, but then sort of fell in line. But Rubio is not a isolationist. He has a set of foreign policies. Obviously, he's really big on stuff related to Latin America and Cuba, especially representing Florida. But he is not one of these super fringe types, at least not as a senator. So it'll be interesting to see how he does in that position. But by and large, the pattern that we're seeing, the recurring theme with these picks is loyalty, fealty over any kind of real ideology, any kind of work history, experience, track record, particular theory of the case. I mean, the defense secretary pick, this Congressman Lee Zeldin for EPA, didn't really know that he was an environmental expert, but Trump has decided that he is. You see John Ratcliffe, the CIA director. First and foremost, these are people that have been loyal to Trump through thick and thin, and he's rewarded them with some incredibly important jobs in the government, again, provided that they can get Senate confirmation.
Now, obviously, everybody's worried about what he's going to do. When Democrats are in office, we see how hard it is to govern. We just saw that with the, getting a handle on, clearly failing to get a handle on inflation. Just how hard it is to fix the problems that people are upset about. When Trump wins, many people assume he can be as extreme as he likes. There's no guardrails, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, as you've said, we remember him being chaotic and falling out with people before. And 2 of his big campaign promises, the kind of massive tariffs on foreign goods and mass deportations of migrants, on the face of it, would wreck the economy. And indeed, the tariffs would cause inflation, which voters apparently don't like. So is there, I mean, not really for optimism necessarily, but a reason to not see this as an all-powerful sort of steamroller of an agenda, and that some policies will be, diluted or fall apart, to maybe get out of that feeling that he is the Dark Lord is unstoppable?
I mean, I remember standing on the convention floor in Milwaukee for the Republican convention, and it was the night of the convention where that that day's sort of placard sign that the delegates got said, mass deportations now on it, which, I had to sort of stand there and think, wow, this is where we've gotten in American politics. This is dark. This feels, borderline dystopic, but also having this feeling at the same time that none of you understand what this is actually going to mean, let alone whether it's feasible, it's workable. I mean, I was talking to a conservative who's deep in MAGA world here, who described it to me as a moonshot, which I thought was interesting. It's a little off message for him because we're basically supposed to be told this is a fait accompli, happens on day one. We're going to do it. Don't worry about it. Moonshot, not exactly full of confidence there. But I, on the convention floor, just thought, one, you don't understand how this is actually going to work and what this would mean for not just the people affected, but for the entire American economy, the workforce. There are a lot of parts of regular people's daily lives that depend on undocumented immigrants, and you just don't know it. And if those people suddenly disappear, there's going to be a pretty dramatic shock to the American economy, the American way of life. Same goes for tariffs. I mean, that one I always found kind of striking because the economics, the research on tariffs is pretty straightforward. Like, it's not a difficult, explanation when you say, if you put slap tariffs on a whole bunch of things, all of your video game consoles are going to be that much more expensive. Basically, all of these consumer goods that you depend on in your life are going to get dramatically more expensive because those costs are passed to you. And there was just kind of a reflexive, well, we got to stick it to China and we got to, bring American manufacturing back here. And if it takes some pain, in theory, it's worth it. Now, when that pain actually happens, when it hits, if tariffs do go into place, I think the conversation will be a lot different. And if these things really happen, mass deportation, massive amounts of tariffs, the economy will be disrupted. And I fully expect people who voted for Donald Trump on the economy this year to vote in a different way 2 years from now in the 2026 midterms if they don't feel like their life has gotten better. I don't think that swing toward Donald Trump is a sign of some huge realignment, a permanent change in the American electorate. There's a lot of people who just felt that they were stretched thin, things cost too much, and they needed a change. And they'll vote the other way if they don't feel like that's gotten any better in 2 years.
Yeah, I can already see the vox pops in the New York Times with people going, I thought he'd be great, but now I regret voting for him.
So, I mean, you've talked a bit about the Department of Education and NASA potentially facing sort of existential threats. Could some bits of the US government end up so gutted that a future theoretical Democratic president can't rebuild them? Is that a serious risk?
It's a good question. We've never seen an agency like the Department of Education get knocked out, basically wiped off the map with the kind of speed that the Trump people say that they want to do this time around. I mean, if anything, for better or worse, you see agencies get created. You see big behemoths like the Department of Homeland Security emerge out of the 9/11 terrorist attacks and the sort of response to that. You don't see agencies get, shuttered all that often, though we may maybe about to see it now. I think that, again, these are promises that are easy to make and very, very hard to implement. The Department of Education, sure, it has inefficiencies in it, but it is the main way that public education is funded in the United States. It gives out these huge amounts of money in grants. That's really the main thing that it does, that and sort of civil rights enforcement. But they're not going to get rid of that. They're not going to get rid of funding for public education. In a lot of places in this country, public education is extremely popular, in most places, in fact. And if you say you're going to get rid of the department, are you getting rid of all of that funding? I think the answer to that, even from the Trump people, is probably no. But then where are you going to put that function? And is there going to be any kind of disruption when you do that by by moving, the grant making office, the funding office to somewhere else. Like none of that is going to be popular either. And those are people who are experts in knowing how to fund public education. So again, these things are very, very easy to say, and they make for great sound bites. But I just, the fact that there's been so little actual description of how you would do this and the possible consequences, disruptions, chaos that would ensue makes me think that these plans don't stand much of a chance. I mean, NASA is another one. You said, in addition to being an incredibly important federal agency, it's also one of the most popular. Everyone loves astronauts here. Everyone loves Tom Hanks and Apollo 11, Apollo 13, whichever movie he was in. They don't want to see NASA go away. They want the astronauts to keep coming to their school to tell them about moon rocks. So another one where I think the sloganeering sort of fits that MAGA mold, but I think they're going to have a really hard time trying to erase the Department of Education or NASA.
It's shocking to hear that so many of Trump's policies might not stand up to reality.
Yes, as if we hadn't seen this movie before. Yeah, right.
Andy, Biden promised a return to normalcy, but does this election show that maybe normal times aren't around the corner for the US for a long time? Or do you think actually maybe something closer to normal will occur quicker than we think?
I don't think normal will occur at least in the next 2 years. Again, we're talking about getting rid of entire agencies that could send shockwaves through the American public education system. That doesn't sound like normal to me. And yeah, Biden, he ran in 2020 on a message that clearly a lot of Americans wanted to hear. I mean, historic levels of voter turnout in 2020, levels that were not matched this year. But he acted on that huge victory by passing these major policies on clean energy, and they overheated the economy. And despite the effort to say, he was the candidate who was pro-democracy, his administration had done all of these really important things on manufacturing, on growing American industry, superconductors, and on and on and on. The American people said, whether it's you, Joe Biden, or then Kamala Harris, things are too expensive. Inflation got out of control, and our lives are just not where they need to be. We can't afford things, and we want something else. So I don't know if the American people this time were thinking at all about normal, if they were thinking about that kind of message again. It seems really the message was just clear, anti-incumbent, throw out the bums, the kind of message, saw where you guys are, and we've seen in a whole bunch of other major democratic countries around the world this year. But I don't know if normal is in the cards on the menu this time. I mean, if anything, from the interviews I did out on the campaign trail, you heard echoes of 2016. It's like, we want someone to go in there and bust things up a little bit, take on the elites, take down the establishment. That kind of anti-government, anti-elite sentiment was back again this year. And so, I think people don't necessarily want to return to normal.
So Andy is not going to stick around for part 2 because nobody should be forced to talk about Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick if they don't have to. But he's going to help us answer a question from one of our Patreon backers in But Your Emails. If you support us on Patreon, of course, you too can submit a question. This one is short and sweet from David. Is Trump going to try and change the Constitution to be able to run again? To be clear, there is a constitutional amendment which means you can only run for 2 terms. They're normally consecutive, but Trump's done things a little differently. Andy, is this a real threat? I'm sure. He might want to, but how could he?
I don't think it's a real threat. I understand where your audience member is coming from, because Donald Trump talked in sort of vague terms during the campaign about how if Christians voted for him, they'd never have to worry about voting again. When you hear that, you start to hear the sounds of autocracy, authoritarianism, doesn't lend itself to feeling confident about your democracy. But to get rid of term limits so that he could run again in a formal way, legal, constitutional way, you have to amend the Constitution. You have to get rid of the 22nd Amendment and add a new one, basically saying there are no term limits. To do that, you need super majorities, 2/3 of the U.S. House, of the U.S. Senate, and then you need ratification by 3/4 of the state legislatures in the U.S. And, maybe one sort of perverse outcome of polarization in this country is that I don't think you can get those kinds of majorities to agree on anything in America at this point, let alone agree on getting rid of term limits for American presidents. So am I concerned about the way Donald Trump talks about this? Yes. And the signals that sends to his followers? Yes. Am I concerned about an actual constitutional amendment getting rid of term limits? No, I'm not.
Well, there we go. That, I think, in the context of the current period, counts as good news. Andy, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Next up, more new jobs on this side of the Atlantic. Kemi Badenoch's new shadow cabinet was somewhat overshadowed by American catastrophe last week, but we can't let this dream team go unacknowledged. Zoe, our own Rachel Cunliffe says this team has a distinctly fresh flavour. I think that's a value-neutral judgment there, with Priti Patel the only sort of big blast from the past with a Foreign Office brief. What does this lineup say about the talent available in the new, is it 121 MP Tory party?
Well, it doesn't say a lot. What it says is not great, because what you have here is basically a list of figures that if you follow politics and have been following politics for some time, you might have heard of them, but you won't really know anything they've done, because they've sort of been always there throughout the Tory melodrama. They're all tainted by that, but they're none of the big hitters. There's no Jeremy Hunt. There's none of those names that you are familiar with. So what you have, Rachel has written a great piece on this, but I wouldn't describe them as distinctly fresh. I think they are rather stale and old, sitting at the back of the fridge, waiting for their moment on the worktop. It's not giving fresh new talent. It's giving these people weren't really wanted a while ago, so why are they being trotted out now? Obviously, we've got Priti Patel. She's back. She's going to be Foreign Secretary. She's got a lot of diplomatic experience from pretending to to be Foreign Secretary.
She has.
When she held unauthorized meetings
She faked it till she made it.
She did. Yeah, she did. She's done very well. Obviously, the big thing is what Badenoch would do with Robert Jenrick, who she was running against for the Tory leadership. She is given him Shadow Justice Secretary. Now, these two don't particularly get on. As you can imagine, they were both in the running for the race. There's going to be a little bit of ill feeling there. She has brought him into her cabinet. Some thought she might not even do that. She's not given him Home Secretary, and that's probably, or Shadow Home Secretary, that's probably quite wise, because that was the basis of the Tory campaign, that brief in many ways, and outsourcing it to your rival either looks like you're deliberately trying to destroy them, or that you can't handle taking ownership of the brief yourself. So Justice is about right. It gives him a chance to kind of pop at the opposition over kind of law and order, which is his thing, but without having him too much in the spotlight over home affairs stuff. I would say she's packed the cabinet with some allies. You've got people like Laura Trott in there, Chris Philp, who always sounds like he's got a couple of letters missing from his last name. Yeah. And Alex Burkhart, but then there's also people in there as well. So she hasn't done the whole Truss thing of just packing it with allies. There are also some people in there who she's trying to keep on side. The big question is, will this be enough to keep the Tory party together? I'm still not convinced. I think Badenoch, I spoke about this last time I was on the podcast, she has a habit of rubbing a lot of people up the wrong way. I think her performance at PMQs has actually showed that she's not quite as effective at landing those blows as people were worried she might be. And I think, when you look at the sort of issues the Conservative Party are grappling with, when you look at how she's received the news about Donald Trump's win, I think she's going to wind up some in the moderate part of the party.
Jonn, it's not a hard right team in the sense there's no Suella Braverman, Esther McVeigh, my guilty fave, Danny Kruger, who's
Why is he your guilty fave?
because
what on earth's
he's
the backstory
like
there?
because he's like nuts. Like now that Miriam Cates has gone, he is in that weirdo hardline Christian conservative thing. His book, I saw quotes from his book online, and I was like, I've got to read this book. Because at one point he goes sort of full, like, you know, when Jordan Peterson's almost crying, that sort of thing where he's just going. And the problem with the ideal, I think, with a capital I, which is what wokeness is or something, I don't know the full context, he goes, is death. It worships death. And this I think is his objection to the assisted dying bill. Is
Well, we do worship death.
Is that the left
We do that on here.
worships death. I think he's confused the left with the band Slayer. So anyway, there aren't so many kind of absolute kind of horrors in there. Is this her doing? Is this her trying to be project sort of unity, some moderation?
I think there probably is an element of that. I mean, hilariously, who would have seen this coming a few months ago? She did end up as the unity candidate. Because Jemrick had a lot of quite divisive ideas, and Badenoch was the one going, "No, look at me, I can unite the party against this divisive guy who paints out murals on children's homes and stuff like that." So I think there probably is an element of that. Plus, she's not actually stupid. She will know that that is the job, and that there aren't that many Tory MPs. So, like, she does need to kind of bring in other factions. But also another reason is going to be there aren't that many Tory MPs. She does have to bring all these people in, or she will literally not be able to staff a front bench. There are fewer Tory MPs than there are Labour government jobs, which is an incredible statistic. I think it's 124 Labour front benchers compared to 121 Tory MPs. So they're already doubling up or bringing in people from the Lords. The other thing I think often gets understated in this stuff, people often look at stuff going in Westminster and see it through a sort of factional lens and think, oh, like clearly keeping those people out because they're from the wrong fact. A lot of the time it's personal. Like, I don't think Braverman is out because they think she's too right-wing. It's because nobody likes her. Like, she fell out with everyone. She wasn't a team player. Danny Kruger, as you say, is he's a bit loose cannon-y. He does have some interesting opinions. I don't know what the deal is with Esther McVey, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if there was something like that. I mean, if you told me, apropos of nothing, that Kemi Badenoch had fallen out with Esther McVey, I wouldn't feel the need to fact check that. I feel like that is something I would find convincing.
We do forget that some of these people that we find unpleasant are also found unpleasant by their colleagues, and that sometimes hampers their careers, despite whatever their beliefs might be.
Yeah, completely.
So, sorry, as Jonn points out, it's slim pickings. I mean, they've even had to bring in Frank Mansour as defence, not secretary, but minister.
He's shadowing the defence minister of state, yes.
Yes, that's it. And so, I mean, that's scraping the barrel. With so few options, I read a piece that pointed out that Badenoch may have less room to hire and fire and deal with dissent, and that it's quite hard to sort of kick people out if you've got nobody to replace them with. And it was suggested that this might actually give some of these shadow ministers more power than they might otherwise have.
I think that's true, and that's a really good point. But I also think it makes the prospect of potentially getting a senior role in the shadow cabinet more likely in some people's minds. So you probably will get a certain amount of manoeuvring, even more maybe than we've seen recently, of MPs thinking, I'm not too many steps removed from becoming a senior member of Badenoch's shadow cabinet. I just have to do X. And I think when you've got MPs waiting in the wings to think that one day they might be Tory leader, that is a way up. So I would imagine, yes, there will definitely be. I think Badenoch will struggle with, these big conflicts that are likely to occur over things like the ECHR and where that makes her key ministers fall. But equally, there are going to be people lining up to take those positions. So in some ways, she might have a slightly strengthened hand from it as well.
I think that's probably true, but also regicide is weirdly addictive. Like, there's loads of examples of, like the recent Tory party, but also Australian politics the last couple of decades. They've had this culture of spills where, like, if a leadership is not going well, they just kick them out and get another one in. And there's historic examples as well. I mean, you can see this in periods in Rome. It's kind of the Wars of the Roses as well. It's like literally like, well, we did that once and it didn't work out, but why not roll the dice again and get another king? So I do think it's entirely plausible that, like, It's going to be hard for the Tories, even though like Labour are not doing brilliantly at the moment. It's entirely possible that they're so unpopular they don't make any particular gains at the locals next year, and then the muttering will start because it's like, well, why not?
Well, Zoe, there may indeed. So it may indeed be the case that Badenoch doesn't make it all the way. Now, we've got good old Mel Stride as Shadow Chancellor, but the likes of James Cleverly, Tom Tugendhat, even Jeremy Hunt are absent. Are some of them, do you think, deliberately keeping their hands clean because they think it's going to backfire and they want to keep their kind of leadership hopes alive?
100%. I mean, you look. I've said this before, but you look at James Cleverly, and to me, he just absolutely looks like a man who's just waiting for his moment in the sun.
He's like, not my problem, mate.
Yeah, and he's just like sat back having lunches with the Financial Times, saying, "Oh, I don't know. I'll think about it. Maybe I will. Maybe I will." He knows what he's doing.
There used to be which was the quiz show where basically if you didn't win the prize, they would show you the prize at the end. It was quite sadistic, and they go,
Wasn't it Bullseye?
Was it Bullseye?
Take a look at what you could have won.
Take a look at what you could have won. And James Cleverly is the proverbial speedboat that the Tories could have won.
I mean, Tom Tugendhat's interesting because he's had a couple of goes at this now. And I think there's always been a sense that he probably is quite unlikely to make it because he is seen as being that more moderate force in the party when the party is tilting to the right. And you can question whether that is a fair analysis of him because arguably some of his policies aren't actually that way inclined. But I wonder if he thinks maybe his time is even further on. It's when they've actually given two leaders a crack at moving towards the right and then the centre come back round and say, let's go again. I wonder if he's really in it for the long run, whereas James Cleverly's thinking, few months.
Well, look, which rising star should we keep an eye on? Because you've mentioned some of the kind of the A-list. But I saw some names and I just knew nothing about them. There's James Cartledge at Defence, Ed Argar at Health. And, I do present a podcast about politics, but these were not people who had particularly caught my eye before. Is there anybody that seems that maybe is less well known, is sort of fresher, that seems like they've got it going on?
I literally just looked those people up to check you weren't making them up.
I have not made.
No, they're real.
Them up.
They're completely real.
So if you bumped into any of them in the halls of Westminster?
No, I haven't, much to my chagrin. I would say Neil O'Brien's quite an interesting character. He's Shadow Education Minister. He writes a Substack that has a lot of readers, according to Rachel Cunliffe. And he writes for a variety of publications. He's written a piece on the New Statesman for fertility rates. He comes across sometimes as quite reasonable on some issues, and actually that is quite a high bar for Conservative MPs these days.
I followed him on Twitter for a bit during the pandemic because he was very hard on COVID deniers. He was really studs up on people like Andrew Bridgen. And then when the pandemic passed, I was like, oh, bloody hell, he's a Tory with loads of Tory opinions. I don't like this.
I would say he's quite punchy and he's quite sort of tongue-in-cheek funny. He doesn't seem to take himself too seriously in that way that I think sometimes people like Kemi Badenoch can, where they come across as if they think they're much, much cleverer than everybody else. And so I just wonder if he has maybe a little bit of, I hate to use this word when describing a Tory MP, but maybe a little bit of charm that might see him rise slightly above the rest in terms of media outings and in terms of name recognition.
One to watch. Also, if anybody has met, can confirm the existence of Ed Argar, please do let us know.
He's just the guy who came with a frame when you bought it. He's not real.
He's going to be the next Tory leader. I'm putting money on him now.
He's a
dark horse.
I do think it says something about politics, though, that I think probably as recently as 8 months ago, a lot of people would have been like, Mel Stride, who's he? He's not real. And he's kind of through being one of the few sort of ministers. He was kind of like the Secretary of State for the morning broadcast round during the election, wasn't he? He was always kind of willing to go and give a quote. And then by putting himself up for the leadership and not coming last, he's kind of propelled himself to the point where it seems entirely plausible that he's Shadow Chancellor and no one's kind of laughing at that idea now. So maybe Ed Argar in 6 months' time will be a future leader. Who knows?
You heard it here first. Jonn, Liberals, I've noticed, particularly this past week or so, are often accused of celebrating their own intelligence and looking down on people.
Yes, we are.
But Kemi Badenoch does an excellent job of doing that from a Conservative angle. Her PMQs so far have not been triumphant. How is her vibe translating?
I would call her combative. I would say she's very fighty, which I think is what her supporters voted for. I think actually it's not necessarily the worst thing to do in PMQs because you're not really trying to get an answer to a question, are you? You're trying to get a clip on the evening news. And she looked very comfortable doing it. She looks like she's she's picking issues on which the government is weak, such as the fact that, the winter fuel allowance is obviously in there, but also like the increased tax on employers, the fact that there are various things the government is doing that are probably going to make life more expensive, and this is necessary and important, but nonetheless is going to prove unpopular in the short term. She looks like she's quite good at punching a bruise. But the flip side of that is she doesn't seem to listen to the flip side of that is she doesn't seem to listen to the answers. Like there was a bit in this week's session where she just kind of rolled on with the Prime Minister won't answer the question. And Starmer was just like, I did answer the question. I'll repeat the figure for you. This is the figure. And she didn't look flustered, but she did kind of look like an idiot. So I think it sort of depends on which angle you judge it from. I think once it's kind of clipped for social media and the news and so on, I think she will probably be going down quite well for the sort of people who are already predisposed to the Conservative Party. I don't see her necessarily winning new support that way.
Well, I mean, I've made my views clear, but, I do just think that if in any other line of work or just in your life, people use the words that they use as sort of compliments for Kemi Badenoch, you would run a mile. If somebody said, come to the pub, meet my mate, he's really abrasive, he doesn't mince his words and he doesn't suffer fools gladly, you would go, no thank you. That person sounds like an asshole. And that does seem to be the kind of, that she seems to be gambling on aggressive unpleasantness as a winning thing. And I do feel like if you're being clipped like that, you don't want to sound like just going in hard all the time, particularly if sometimes you fuck up.
I think there are several reasons they were idiots not to pick James Cleverly, but I think one of the big ones is people like him. Even people on the other side of the fence generally think he's a nice bloke. I don't think there are a lot of people on her side of the fence who would not say that of Kemi Badenoch. And given that so much of the job is you're not leading a government, it's about personnel management, I do think that's going to come back to haunt her. Also, she hates journalists. And she makes her hatred of journalists very clear. And that's a perfectly reasonable position. Many people hold it. In the sort of position you're in as leader of the opposition, where you're kind of often a slightly supplicant position towards the media, trying to get attention. Very aware I've used the word position about 20 times in that sentence. But I'm just not sure this is going to play well. She's going to be wanting favours that may not be forthcoming from people for reasons that are personal as much as ideological.
I'd just like to make it clear that it's not a reasonable position to hate journalists en masse. Lots of us are wonderful, wonderful people.
We're not, though, are we? Come on. They're never going to believe that.
Zoe, it's interesting the way we've talked quite a lot, I think, in the recent months about the different ways in which the right and the left respond to sort of, victory and defeat and how self-critical they are. And it seems that, and we'll probably talk a bit in the extra bit about this, that the Democrats, liberals around the world are sort of expected to kind of lash themselves for their beliefs. And this shows that they've been thoroughly rejected and must, start again from scratch. I don't see that vibe coming from the Tories. She's not projecting the need for kind of a long, hard look at themselves and root and branch reform and see why they were so soundly rejected. Have I missed something? Is there any what is she saying that the Tories have learned from their defeat?
Well, I mean, she said in her acceptance speech, we need to take stock and think about this. And then you're right, immediately. That was just a phrase that the Tories are throwing around because they see the media saying it and they think, oh, we should take stock. That's what everyone wants us to do. But they don't actually know what it means because it requires such a degree of self-reflection that I think they're incapable of, because when you really drill down into where things went wrong for the Tories, there are so many different elements of it and so much personal liability. And a lot of those people are still there. So I think that's part of it. I also think she is very much of the kind of, the right wing of the party that thinks and is going to hammer that the things that the Tories went wrong on were immigration and taxation. And, they're going to now look at the success of Trump and probably really lean into that as evidence that actually maybe they're correct and that's the way the public is going, ignoring the fact that there was a Labour landslide just a few months ago. People didn't just leave the Tories to flock to reform. A lot of them flocked to the Lib Dems and to the Labour Party. But that gives that gives the governing party, I guess, too much credit for the opposition. They don't want to say, what can we learn from the opposition? That isn't good politics in many ways.
But isn't that telling that they would probably they're very keen to draw more conclusions from the success of the populist right in America than from their own massive defeat in the country in which they live.
But we knew that was going to happen when they were leaning towards picking a leader from the right.
Oh, to have the self-confidence of the Conservatives. And that's the show. Thanks to Jonn.
Thank you.
Zoe.
Thank you.
And our guest, Andy Kroll. And a big thanks to the supporters whose generosity keeps us going. You can join them for as little as £3 a month and get the podcast early without ads plus lots more. Search Oh God What Now Patreon. We'll see you next time.